Hey guys, it's me Jack, and I'm back with a very special review. Today marks the 30th anniversary of one of my favorite movies from my childhood, The Land Before Time. Like many children, I loved dinosaurs, so eventually this led to my parents buying The Land Before Time on VHS. And I watched it many, many times. And then I realized there were more Land Before Time movies, and I watched those, and The Land Before Time became a part of my childhood. But then I grew up and got into other things, like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter, and I really didn't think about Land Before Time that much. Occasionally I would rewatch the original or one of the sequels, if I was really in the mood. But for the most part, I didn't really think about it all that much. It wasn't until 2016 when the 14th installment in the franchise, The Land Before Time Journey of the Brave, was released that I went back and watched the original Land Before Time with critical eyes. And I can happily say that it's held up great. The Land Before Time is still just as good now as it was when I was a kid. Well, it does have a couple of problems, but overall it's still awesome. Released in the year of 1988, the movie was directed by Don Bluth, the man who directed movies like An American Tail and The Secret of Nim. He believed that a children's movie can be as dark as it needs to be, as long as there's a happy ending. And I really do respect that. And while I understand you don't want to traumatize children, I do think that it is important to put a level of darkness and maturity in there. Because hey, life isn't perfect. Sometimes life can be hard. You feel angry, you feel scared, and Don Bluth's movies do a great job of capturing that, while still throwing in some humor and cutesy characters to keep the kids entertained. The story of the movie centers around an Apatosaurus named Littlefoot. He and his family are on their way to a place called the Great Valley, when suddenly an earthquake separates them. Now on his own, Littlefoot must find his way to the Great Valley himself. Well, not entirely himself. He comes across a bunch of other young dinosaurs that have also been separated from their families. A Triceratops named Sara, a Parasaurolophus named Ducky, a Pteranodon named Petrie, and a Stegosaurus named Spike. The 5 of them must learn to work together and find their way to the Great Valley, while being hunted by a ferocious T-Rex named Sharptooth. This movie and its characters are iconic to people who are into dinosaurs, and hell, people who are into animation in general. One of the real reasons why The Land Before Time connected with me and so many other children are the characters. Littlefoot is a perfect main protagonist. He's your typical curious, wide-eyed individual who has the belief that his mother and his family will always be with him. But then he is sadly proven wrong when his mother dies. This was a moment that always went over my head as a kid. I didn't really believe that his mother was dead for quite a while. In fact, it wasn't until I was older and my parents actually explained to me what had happened. Littlefoot himself has trouble accepting this. There's a heart-wrenching moment when he sees his own shadow and thinks it's his mother, and then realizes that it's not, and that he is in fact on his own. But this isn't bad at all that they included this. Quite the opposite, actually. Because we see that even without an adult, Littlefoot and the other characters manage to get to where they need to go. Littlefoot manages to get over his fear and win. And this is a great message for kids, because it shows them that you don't need to be an adult in order to be brave and capable. Littlefoot is a likable character, but he's certainly not perfect. He gets scared, he gets sad, and at times he gets extremely angry, mainly at Sara, who I will talk about later. He's not a particularly deep character, but he doesn't need to be. In fact, sometimes it's the simple characters that are the most enduring. And despite being, well, a dinosaur, I completely related to him. Now let's talk about Sara. Ah yes, Sara. The biggest asshole in the entire gang. Sara is a character that understandably some people don't like. But I gotta say, I still really love her character. Yes, she is extremely unlikable throughout most of the movie, but that's intentional, and in my opinion it works very well. It adds something more interesting to the gang. They're not just all good, perfect children who get along just fine. There is one that is pretty much a bully. But unlike Littlefoot, who is scared and is not afraid to show it, Sara tries to hide her fear and always act tough and independent. This is shown right when she first hatches. We see her trying to break out of her egg by headbutting her father. And even when she's out, she tries to show how strong and independent she is, until a storm hits and she screams in terror. Part of her douchebag personality is because of her douchebag father, who is a fucking racist. Seriously, this was pretty much the first movie that introduced me to the idea of racism, even when I didn't know what it was. Again, it's great. Kids can just see it as characters being jerks, and adults can see the real world parallels. And then when those kids grow up, then they'll see the real world parallels as well. But back to Sara. She refuses to join Littlefoot at first and goes off on her own, only to come across the Sharptooth. Again, she tries to show how brave she is by headbutting him, only to realize that he's not actually dead. He awakes, she screams, and she runs. She runs back into Littlefoot and the gang, and then tries to act tough again, and brag about how she apparently faced the Sharptooth with no fear. When they find food, she brags about being the one who found it, and when they do have food, she refuses to eat with them, and tries to get her own food. And in a legitimately hilarious moment, she tries headbutting a tree to knock down some leaves, and at that exact moment, Littlefoot throws some leaves over to her, and she thinks that she made them fall. Then she brags about not being afraid of the Sharptooth, which scares the others, excluding Littlefoot, into joining her. But Littlefoot goes off by himself. However, one by one, they all start joining him, until Sara is the only one left, and she is very scared, and this motivates her into joining them as well. She and Littlefoot represent different types of children. Some are extremely scared and aren't afraid to show it, while others try to hide their fear and act brave and strong all the time. Another great scene is when Sara insults Littlefoot's mother, which causes him to beat the crap out of her, and a brutal fight between the two of them breaks out. They part ways, and Sara tries to lead the other group to the Great Valley, while Littlefoot goes off on his own once again. But Sara leads them the wrong way, and they end up in trouble. And Sara, being Sara, is too arrogant to admit it. But in the end, when the rest of the gang are being attacked by the Sharptooth, she comes in and helps them knock him off a cliff. And in the end, she redeems herself. The rest of the characters are great as well. The character of Ducky is extremely cute and adorable, voiced by the late Judith Barcy. It really is so sad what happened to her. Her catchphrase, yup yup yup, is probably the most iconic line in the entire Land Before Time franchise. There's also the character of Petrie, a cowardly pteranodon who doesn't know how to fly. He's the only one of these characters who is actually voiced by an adult and not a child. He has this very strange way of talking. He talks almost like a toddler. He's fun. And then we have Spike, the Stegosaurus. Spike is a pretty lovable character. He doesn't talk, and he just likes to eat. When he first hatches, he's surrounded by grass, so he just eats his way out. Of course, we also have to talk about the villain of the movie, Sharptooth the T-Rex. He's up there with the T-Rex from Jurassic Park as one of the best interpretations of the greatest dinosaur that ever lived. His design is legitimately threatening. While the other characters do have a somewhat cartoonish design, Sharptooth for the most part looks very much like what a real T-Rex could have looked like. Well, with a couple of adjustments to make him a bit more menacing. He's a character that doesn't talk at all. He's just a force of nature that wants to kill and eat our main heroes. Right from when you first meet him, he gets into a fight with Littlefoot's mother, and constantly gets knocked over. But despite that, he just keeps getting up and persisting. Eventually, he pounces right on Littlefoot's mother and bites right into her, in a legitimately terrifying moment, although we only see it in shadow. She knocks him down again, and the earthquake starts. But does that stop him? Hell no. He gets back up and continues chasing them. Then he starts slipping off the side of a cliff. But does that stop him? Hell no. He continues to try to kill Littlefoot and Sara. Littlefoot's mother whips him and he falls down the cliff and into the underground. But does that stop him? Hell no. He survives the fall and continues to hunt our heroes. That is a force of nature. No matter what you do to stop it, it just persists and will not stop until you are dead, like the Terminator. In fact, Sharptooth is really the dinosaur equivalent of the Terminator. He always has a real presence whenever he's on screen, and the sound effects for him are truly menacing, ranging from growls to ferocious roars. Eventually, our heroes are able to defeat him in a legitimately thrilling climax, where they knock him off a cliff and into the water, drowning him. Apparently, there were actually a lot of scenes of the Sharptooth that were cut out of the movie because they were too intense. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I would definitely like to see those scenes. You can tell that this movie was made by Don Bluth, because it has that style of animation that he uses in his movies. It's a really great animation style. Something I noticed rewatching the movie is that there is a real lack of color. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is color, but it's not particularly bright, compared to some other movies like the Land Before Time sequels. Throughout the movie, the colors are very dark, again, adding to the dark feeling of the story. The only time where the film is really colorful is at the very end when they find the Great Valley, which makes sense. They've overcome all the danger and now they can finally live in happiness. And then there's the score. This movie has one of my favorite soundtracks for any movie ever. The soundtrack was composed by the late James Horner. This is quite possibly the most nostalgic soundtrack ever. Every time I hear it, my childhood just comes rushing back to me. The music that plays over the death of Littlefoot's mother is just heartbreaking. I mean, the scene itself is sad enough on its own, but the soundtrack just made it even more heartbreaking. There's other great tracks as well, like the playful, childish music when our characters are just having fun, the scary, intense music when the Sharptooth is attacking, and the music that plays over the discovery of the Great Valley, which is just beautiful. And then there's the song If We Hold On Together by Diana Ross, and it's one of my favorite songs of all time, about how even when things are at their absolute worst, you still gotta keep going. This is one of the problems with some of the later Land Before Time sequels. They got rid of the If We Hold On Together music, and that music was the heart and soul of the Land Before Time franchise. It's like a Star Wars movie without the Star Wars theme, or an Indiana Jones movie without the Indiana Jones theme, or a James Bond movie without the James Bond theme. You get my point. Something else I must praise about this movie is the designs of all the dinosaurs. I mean, sure they are somewhat cartoony, but they still manage to, for the most part, stay true to the actual dinosaurs. At least from what we know about them. In something like The Good Dinosaur, which is a movie that I do actually like, the designs were a bit too cartoony and just came off as kinda silly. It was hard to take these dinosaurs seriously, but here the designs are much better. So yeah, this movie is awesome. Does it have any problems? Yes. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is that the movie is just too short. It's only 69 minutes long, and that's with credits. I just feel like the film should have been a little bit longer. It seems like there were scenes cut out of the movie, and that's because there were. Like I said before, there were scenes of the Sharptooth that were deleted because they were too intense. Or at least the producers of the movie thought they were. And who were those producers? None other than George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And what's really sad is that a lot of these deleted scenes haven't been released. It's all a big mystery. There are just a bunch of pictures that you can find online, and that's pretty much it. Personally, I would love to see a director's cut one day, with those scenes added back into the movie. Now, granted, the reason why you can't find these scenes might be because they destroyed the negative, or they just didn't have time to finish those scenes, but still, a man can dream. Granted, I didn't notice how short the movie was when I was a kid, and the fact that it is short makes it very easy to rewatch. But still, it would have been nice if it had just been a little longer. Another issue I have with the movie also has to do with the editing. Apparently, in the original cut of the movie, after Littlefoot and Sara have their big fight and go their separate ways, Littlefoot comes across the ghost of his mother. He is then led straight to the Great Valley. Then he goes back to save his friends and defeat Sharptooth, and lead them back to the Great Valley. However, for some reason, they re-edited this scene. Now, in the final version, Littlefoot and the gang part ways, and we don't know where Littlefoot goes. Then they get into trouble, Littlefoot comes to rescue them, they defeat the Sharptooth, and then all of a sudden, Littlefoot is on his own talking to the ghost of his mother. And then he discovers the Great Valley. And it doesn't make sense this way. Why is he suddenly by himself? Why is he feeling so doubtful about finding the Great Valley when he just defeated the biggest obstacle standing in his way? The original version made much more sense. His friends just left him, so that's why he's by himself, and it makes sense for him to be feeling like this. He's on his own again, and Sharptooth is still out there. Defeating the Sharptooth should be the last thing that they do, but in the final version, it just doesn't work. Also, I must say that the child actors, for the most part, do pretty well, but there are a couple times where their deliveries are not so good. Particularly in the scene where Sara and Littlefoot have an argument. The actor that voiced Littlefoot clearly doesn't sound very invested, and just sounds very bored. But that's pretty much where my negatives end. Other than that, this is a great film. It's one of those movies that is still good even when you watch it as an adult, and not just for nostalgic reasons. The Land Before Time was an enormous success, spawning merchandise and 13 sequels, as well as a TV show. And in case you're wondering, yes, I have seen every single sequel. I do like most of them, but they definitely aren't as good as the original. They aren't nearly as dark or intense, and the animation isn't as good. They also included songs. Now, I'm not really that bothered by this, mainly because the songs are for the most part pretty good, and I grew up singing them a lot. Hell, I still sing some of them even to this day. The earlier sequels were definitely the best in my opinion. They still had a lot of the heart of the original, but as time went on they just got worse, until we got to the 13th movie, which was just dreadful. Yeah, let's just forget about that. The Land Before Time is a true animated classic, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. I'm gonna give The Land Before Time an 8 out of 10.